The Israeli military released this latest video in a bid to show its on-ground combat with Hamas in the shell-shocked Shuja'iyya district of Gaza. Israel on Wednesday said that it has lost 10 more soldiers to the war, the biggest single-day loss since the country lost 15 of its men on the 31st of October this year. Now, 18,000 Palestinian civilians have been killed so far in this war. The death toll has sparked an international outcry. United Nations General Assembly overwhelmingly passed a non-binding resolution this week calling for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. 153 nations in favor, including India, who extended her support for the first time in a resolution on Gaza at the UNGA. 10 against, including the United States, and 23 abstentions. Now, even as America voted against a ceasefire, its president, Joe Biden, warned that Israel is, quote-unquote, starting to lose support internationally due to what he said is indiscriminate bombing. In response, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu asserted that his country would continue to wage war against Hamas with or without international support. Amid the seemingly widening rift between Israel and United States and the mounting pressure, National Security Advisor of United States Jake Sullivan traveled to Israel and met with Prime Minister Netanyahu.
יש פה כוח שרוצה להחריט את היהודים ומדינתם על פני האדמה, ואנחנו נלחמים את אותה מלחמה באותה גבורה. זה לא הפרזה, זה לא מילים, אתם יודעים כמה שזה לא מופרז. יש מחיר מאוד כואב, מאוד מאוד כואב, אבל הוא הכרחי. אם אנחנו רוצים לחיות פה, ואנחנו החלטנו לחיות פה, במולדת שלנו, במדינה שלנו, וזה מחייב קרב מתמשך. אני רוצה להגיד לכם שהקרב הזה יימשך עד הניצחון. זה לא הולך להיפסק, זה לא אמירה סתם, בואו נחסל את החמאס, נחסל את החמאס. אין לנו אלטרנטיבה אחרת. אני רוצה להגיד לכם שכל העולם יושב על היציע עכשיו. תסתכל, רוצה לדעת מי הולך לנצח. אנחנו או הם. אנחנו או הציר. רואים את זה כמלחמה של הציר. בצדק. אנחנו חייבים לנצח.
So this is what the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said in response to what the American president has said. I'm joined to talk more on this by Major General Sanjay Meston. He's a defense expert. Also joining me on the broadcast is Mr. Anil Trigunayath, former ambassador. Good evening and welcome to both of you. And thank you very much for joining us on the broadcast. I'd like to start with you, Ambassador Trigunayath. What do you make of this contrasting statements that the two leaders are making? American president saying that global support is dwindling, and we can see it in the numbers with the UNGA passing that resolution overwhelmingly. But of course, Prime Minister Netanyahu reiterating Israel's stand that we will go ahead with this war and we will continue till we finish off and eliminate the Hamas members. Do we see some kind of rift between America and Israel?
Well, I think that the Americans have reached a level of patience. They have been supporting unconditionally the Israeli war of the waging this fight against Hamas and wanted this group, treating them as terrorists, to be removed. But in the bargain, what one had seen is the tremendous and unprecedented casualties, civilian casualties in this strife that has happened. More than 18,000 people, and now nobody is counting anymore. And more than 50,000 people have been injured. There is no facilities available in the place. More than nearly 1.7 million people have been displaced out of the 2 million there. And it is not only in Gaza. It is also in Israel. 500,000 people have been displaced there also because of the fear of it. So I think that today the war has, in 68 days, has reached a point where the international community has conveyed its disgust and the concern on the ongoing this thing. And the Americans, which have been a standing only lone voice in favor and trying to essentially veto all the proposals at the UN Security Council and otherwise, that had withstood the Israeli onslaught, because without that, it will be extremely difficult for Netanyahu to continue to wage the war.
General Meston, the fact that so far we've seen Israeli superiority when it comes to military skills, whether it's tanks, whether it's air, we have also seen the Hamas side, of course, give it a tough competition, give it a tough answer to all the attacks that Israel has been doing. But how do you see this really moving forward? Israel has lost 10 of its soldiers in a single day, which is the second biggest number that it has seen in terms of loss of its soldiers. The earlier one being 15 back in October, on the 31st of October. Can Israel continue with this kind of a war in the context of the fact that we are now seeing a sort of concern among its international supporting countries that they need to do something about the civilian casualties that are happening in Gaza?
Shreya, absolutely. See, the whole problem is it's a very, very complex operation. Israeli intent being to destroy and finish off Hamas. However, the biggest complexity is the Palestinian civilians who are staying in Gaza, and they are also mingling, or rather, they are part of the system over there. So, unfortunately, whatever targeting is being done, indiscriminate bombing, it is affecting civilians more. And I think the publicity of Hamas, the PR has been excellent. So the whole world is watching with aghast all the casualties to the civilians, especially to the children. So this is making a lot of impact, including now in the entire public sphere, whether it is in United States or across the world. And therefore, now this is what is pressurizing the whole world, especially the Americans, and they're pressurizing Israeli. So what can be done? You have asked a very pertinent question. I think the Israeli strategy has to not change. Their intent, there is no denial on that. The intent must continue. But how do they go about? They have to prevent the loss of civilian casualties, and including their own hostages and also the American hostages. So how to go about this preventing civilians? Now there are 2-3 options or ways. First is, these civilians of Palestinians, they have to be given a safe exit, maybe now into Israeli southern area through one of the Israeli border areas. They get them over there. They, place all military protection around them so that at least they are safe. And they have to identify, hopefully, that no Hamas terrorists should have come here, and get the United Nations, UNRWA, and all the NGOs construct some kind of a tentage for them and basic hygiene, sanitation, and let them be camped there. That is option one. Option two is, we are aware that Egyptian elections are just over. The results will be out in next week, and undoubtedly Sisi is going to become the president again. Now, earlier his stance was clear that he will not allow any Palestinian civilians to come into Sinai Peninsula because of various reasons, especially elections were on. Now, since the election results are going to be announced the next week, perhaps knowing that the economic condition of Egypt is very, very bad, the currency devaluation and inflation, etc., the Western countries are actually proposed a package, economic package, that you take in the civilians in the Sinai Peninsula for some time, and we will give you an economic package. Perhaps, I feel Jake Sullivan, who is already there, he's met also the Saudis, and perhaps he will also have a word with Egypt. This strategy, if it works out, then the advantage is the civilians can be moved there, humanitarian aid can be moved there, and then the Israeli forces can go helter-skelter in the entire area to sort out the Hamas terrorists. If this is not resorted to, let me tell you, this is going to continue so bad that finally Israel will find itself getting isolated from the rest of the world. The UN General Assembly resolution, which is of course non-binding, is a proof to that, including India. Now we have supported this humanitarian ceasefire. So it's a very complex operation. Israelis have to think how to prevent the casualties. And these are the two odd ways I feel The civilians have to be lost somewhere. Otherwise, they have been telling them, you concentrate in South
Okay.
Gaza. Where do they go in South Gaza? There's so huge number of civilians. Where do they go? And even wherever they're going, even those areas are being bombed. And every day, civilians and, especially the women, children are dying. We are not aware how many Hamas terrorists are dying. That
Yeah, so a lot of concern there. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, a
and
lot of
Israeli
concern
forces are
there.
also.
And of course, like you said, that, yeah, that I think Israel needs to rethink its strategy. Perhaps it can in the future has that threat of being isolated by its partner countries as well. But Ambassador Trigunayat, we are seeing resolutions after resolutions at the United Nations. We saw the UN chief invoke the Article 99. Now we have this resolution. But the fact of the matter is that on ground, it doesn't change anything. We can have as many countries as we want voting in favor of a ceasefire. Article 99 was invoked. It was vetoed by the United States. Here as well, the US stood against this resolution. All of this keeps happening at the UN, but it doesn't have an impact on ground. Do we see United Nations just as, an organization which is just symbolic in warlike situations? We saw that during the Russia-Ukraine war as well. Now we're seeing this in the Israel-Hamas war too.
Well, this is unfortunately the current state of global disorder. As I say, that nobody cares about anybody. It's a sort of a jungle rule, essentially. United Nations, what is United Nations? It is, after all, cannot be better than its constituents. It is handicapped by the veto power of these countries. So as long as the United States or Russia or any other P5 country in their own geopolitical interest continue to support any action, it will be very difficult for the others or anybody else to carry out. Now, the UNGA resolutions do not have the same kind of binding authority, but they have a moral authority, which also clearly indicates, and Biden has very clearly articulated it also, that if the international support completely goes against, you see, then Israel has much to lose rather than gain. It was getting better relationships in the Middle East. It was various countries, including Saudi Arabia, were going to normalize. This is all on hold now. So whether can Israel by itself alone live in the region with a very difficult neighborhood? No, it is not possible. America cannot continue to help. They also have their own problems. They also have own domestic constituency. They may have a Jewish very strong lobby. But what we are witnessing now is that the Arab lobby has also become very strong in West, the whole of Western world. So now today the situation is very difficult. US or Biden is also going to contest elections. Currently, his ratings have been the lowest. So are the Netanyahu's. And of course, there are 130 odd these hostages which are there with the Hamas. So at the moment, I don't see that war can continue for too long. And it has continued thus far because of the material support that Israel has been receiving from the United States unconditionally.
Okay.
But now the United States is also being forced into thinking that it is also being completely isolated in the world. And that is not good for them, because then they are also creating problems for themselves by continuing to have this one-sided approach. And I think that Netanyahu will have problems
and amid all of this,
domestically.
India, of course, walking that tightrope. Right, we have India walking that tightrope very strategically, where it's also voted in favor of a ceasefire in Gaza for the first time at the UNGA.
No, I don't think so. India is not walking any tightrope. What India has done is India has clearly, and it is the principled position. And number one is, when this was terror attack, we called them out, we condemned the terror attacks. When the first UNGA resolution came out, it was just in a few days' time, and that time this did not have any reference to the trigger of that attack that the Israelis were doing it. But even at that time, India was very clear that the civilian casualties must be reduced. International humanitarian law must be respected by Israel. And if you remember that immediately after that, there were two UNGA resolutions in which India basically voted against the settlements by Israel, as well as their encroachment in Golan Heights. So it is not that India has not done. India has a principled position, and this time also it is the same thing. It has always stood for the two-state solution. It has stood for the sovereign state. It has a strategic partnership with Israel, but the partnership, India has supported them wherever there is a question where Israel's core interests are concerned. But here it seems to be that Indians also are looking at it, that what is happening around. And that's why Dr. Jaishankar spoke to a Prime Minister of Palestine and the Foreign Minister of Israel only yesterday before the vote, and explained to what is our vote is going to be and why it is going to be that. So I don't see it's a tightrope. It has been our consistent position for decades, and it continues to be that we want to see a two-state solution there.
All right. All right, we'll leave it there. Ambassador Trigunayat and General Sanjay Meston, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us on the broadcast and sharing your perspective on these developments in the Israel-Hamas war. Thank you very much.